Good evening to everyone present here tonight. My name is Siu Yu, and I will be your host for tonight. On behalf of the JPO family, we'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone tuning in for tonight's broadcast. We hope that everyone is doing well and staying safe indoors. A friendly reminder to maintain good hygiene at all times and maintain social distancing when heading out, as we'd like to continue improving your experience with us. To the audience who are in Zoom, please help us achieve this by completing the poll that will be published during the broadcast. To anyone who is interested in sharing tonight's broadcast, a live feed is being shared on the JPO YouTube channel. Do like and subscribe the channel so you can receive live notifications. If you have any question you would like to ask, please feel free to type them out in the Q&A section down below in Zoom and in the live chat box in YouTube. A recording of the webinar will also be uploaded onto the channel. Our guest for tonight is Leon Bosch, which has an honored place among the select groups of virtuoso double bass player worldwide. Concerto engagement in many parts of the world with the likes of conductor Pinkas Zukerman, Nicolas Karma, Nikolai Moldavenu, and Guido Johannes Rumstedt have been matched by collaborations with a long line of leading chamber music groups, among them the Lindsay, Belkia, and Brodsky String Quartet, and the Academy of St. Martin's in the Field Chamber Ensemble, the Moscow Virtuosi, and the Zuckerman Chamber Players. Partnerships with solo performance have embraced such pianists as Peter Donor, Valdemar Ovchinovkov, Mikhail Rudy, and Maria Joa Pires. Leon Bosch has a growing discography of concertos and recital recordings. This will shortly include two albums devoted to the music of the great Giovanni Bottesini and two featuring music by British composers. Then will follow everything from a disc of Russian music and another of composition by Domenico Dragonetti to the complete works of solo double bass by Dieter Dorf, Menotti's concerto, and recording of a string neglected concerto for the instruments. Tonight's interview features Leon Bosch with his topic about the time as principal double bass with the Academy of St. Martin in the Field. As our JPO family attendees are mostly students ranging from primary school to college, their parents and their teachers, the sharing of knowledge and advice you have for all of us is invaluable and greatly appreciated. The JPO is very honored to have Leon Bosch joining in as our guest for tonight. I hope that you will all join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Also, lovely to talk to all the members of the orchestra and the whole musical community in Jesselton.
Thank you very much. And without further ado, once again, a very good afternoon in the UK to Professor Leon, and thank you so much for joining us today. To start off today's interview, what can you tell us about the video that we just watched?
I'm glad you asked that because it's quite interesting. The composer of the music that I played is Josep Cervera, who was Catalan from a part of Spain. And I didn't know about the existence of Josep Cervera until just a few years ago. And I discovered that he'd been a great virtuoso double bass player, but also a great composer for the bass, that he'd written about 60 pieces or thereabouts for the instrument. So I set about finding the manuscripts, and I was in touch with his grandson. And I've recorded 10 of his pieces, and that is one of the most beautiful. I mean, they're all incredibly beautiful, but that's Elegia that you played is one of the most beautiful pieces that Cervera wrote. So this disc I recorded in 2014, and it is still the only CD to be devoted to the music of Josep Cervera.
Thank you very much. What a lovely sharing. And now I would just like to ask that when we go into our main topic for today, Would you like to tell us when and how did you become a member of the Academy of St. Martin's in the Field?
Well, it was, I first played with the Academy in 1995. Sorry, I'm getting my centuries mixed up. 1995. By then, I'd already spent 10 or 11 years as principal double bass of the Camerata in Manchester. But I got an invitation to join the Academy for a recording session for some Rossini opera. And to play in the Academy for every string player is like a dream. And to me, it was no different. I'd always dreamed about playing in the Academy because I'd listened to all the Academy recordings, the famous recordings of the Academy St. Martin in the Fields. And to get the invitation was really quite something. And immediately after the first engagement, where I played in a recording of Rossini opera, they invited me to go back to record some Vivaldi guitar concertos with Pepe Romero. And immediately after that, they invited me to do a concert with one bass in the United Kingdom with Malcolm Arnold Flute Concerto and Tchaikovsky Serenade. Then they invited me on tour to Turkey and to Greece to play Aranjuez Concerto with Pepe Romero and various other pieces. And the director for that concert was Ken Silito. And then I was offered membership, and that's where began my 20-year-long journey with the Academy. And so I started in 1995, and I finally finished in 2014. But I'm sure you have many questions you want to ask me about the time that I spent there. So I'm happy to be at your disposal.
Yes, please do. Tell us more about how have you known and you've worked with a few music directors as I've known,
Yes.
the three music directors, and how, like, where, while you were in the academy, like, would you like to share your experience working with them?
The Academy is a complex musical organism. It is not just so much an orchestra. It has within it, and still does, many different orchestras. So, for example, when I joined the Academy, there was the main orchestra, which was a largish orchestra, which was conducted by Sir Neville Mariner, who was the founder, of course, of the orchestra. And that orchestra with four basses and sometimes six cellos was referred to as the big band, the Academy Big Band. And Sir Neville Mariner conducted that large orchestra. But then there were also two smaller orchestras. There was the string ensemble directed by Ken Silito from the violin, and there's also a string ensemble directed by Iona Brown from the violin. But then there were also three different chamber orchestras. There was a chamber orchestra directed by Ken Silito, and there's also a chamber orchestra directed by Iona Brown. And then, of course, there was the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields Chamber Ensemble, which was the principals of the orchestra coming together to play chamber music. And I was very lucky during my time that I got to play in all the different parts of the Academy. I toured with a big band, I toured with Iona, I toured with Ken, and I also played and recorded with the chamber ensemble. So those were my early years with the Academy, working with the original music director. So Sir Neville, of course, started the orchestra, and the two long-standing music directors were Ken Silito and Iona. And then in latter years, of course, Sir Neville decided to step back a little bit from doing too much with the orchestra. And he then the orchestra decided that they needed to bring in new musical partners. And amongst these new musical partners was Murray Pariah and various other violinists. And then, of course, Joshua Bell. Now, Joshua Bell, of course, as you might know, has become the new music director of the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. But I had the privilege of working with all the music directors of the Academy, the original ones and all the new ones. And so I had an incredible journey. The Academy, as you know, is an international brand name. And most of our work was traveling around the world. So my life for 20 years consisted of basically being at airports. Every Monday morning, I was at Heathrow Airport, we were going somewhere. So for example, if we did a tour of the Far East, which we did many times, we would spend 10 days in the Far East and do 7 countries. And included in those 7 countries would be Australia and China, and Malaysia, as a matter of fact, also was often on the itinerary, and Singapore, and we'd cover a lot of ground very quickly. So there was that part of orchestral life. I got to see the world. I got to travel and to see places that I might not otherwise have traveled to if I had just been by myself as a musician. And also I got to work with incredible musical artists. We recorded with just about anybody that you could mention for the major recording labels. So we recorded for Hensler, for Decca, for EMI, and so many other musical labels. And also, the kind of music we played was very varied. There was, for each music director, the things that they did well. So we would often play with Neville, for example, Beethoven symphonies, and number 3 he did especially well. Number 7 was a favorite. He did Mendelssohn Scottish Symphony incredibly well, so we toured that piece often. And his encores were always the same. We'd play a Mozart overture, or we'd play a Brahms Hungarian dance, or we'd play something from the Reformation Symphony. But he did these pieces extraordinarily well, not just good. And this is the thing that we have to understand as artists. Good enough is good enough, but to be exceptional takes much greater effort. And Sir Neville was very good at making that extra bit of effort to make something very special. But, then there was the smaller chamber orchestras, with Iona and also with Ken. And I toured with them also. We went to some extraordinary places. I mean, I can, just because last night, of course, was election, the end of the election in the United States, it reminds me how many times I visited the United States. Probably 35 big tours of the United States. Usually you'd start off on the West Coast, and you would work your way across the whole of the United States. It would take 3 weeks, but you'd come home after 3 weeks. And I remember a nice long tour with Iona, and playing, for example, Bartók Divertimento and Shostakovich Chamber Symphony, string pieces, and some Bach. I also remember on that tour, we got stranded in Washington because a volcano in Iceland had erupted. And because of the dust clouds, no flights were leaving the United States, or no flights were flying into Europe also. So there were lots of interesting events that arose during the course of my tours with the Academy. Lots of great memories, lots of great concerts. Lots of, I remember the great halls, the Musikverein in Vienna, the Berlin Philharmonie, Boston Symphony Hall, Carnegie Hall, all Davis Hall in San Francisco, wonderful halls in Korea, elsewhere. A career with the Academy was a real blessing. First of all, you got to play great music with fabulous colleagues, and you also got to travel the world. And as you will know, that travel is so important for one's horizons as a human being, and performing everywhere also is very good for one's musical horizons. So it's been, an incredible journey. But I'm sure you've got many more questions about specifics in the Academy, so do go ahead.
Yes, yes, we have I have some questions about the Academy, like more specific ones. Like while in the Academy and while touring, since you've talked about touring around the world, and you've said that every week or every Monday, mostly Mondays, you always had have to be in Heathrow and flying to many places. Yep. How can you cope with because you're going to fly into Southeast Asia or Australia, Malaysia, Singapore? How can you cope with the time, the jet lag, and the timing?
It's interesting you asked that question, because wherever you arrive, you have to perform well. So you have to find a way of looking after yourself in a psychological and physical manner. You have to eat well, you have to sleep well, you have to practice, and you always have to be in good form. Let's not, put too fine a point on it. When an audience pays a lot of money to go to a concert, they expect an event. And as an artist, you know that is what you have to deliver. Every musician, I think, finds a way to cope with the challenges. And I had a particular way in which I dealt with the challenge of touring all the time. The time differences, as you say, can be quite debilitating. But most of the time, I survived. There was only one occasion when I was in danger of oversleeping for a rehearsal. But I had particular mechanisms to make sure that I was always on time, and that I was well rested, and that I was capable of playing my instrument well. So, for example, on days off, I didn't just go and do the sightseeing thing. I would make sure that I did some work. So I'd get up in the morning on a day off on tour. I would have breakfast and I would practice for most, and I'd go to lunch and I'd come back, practice some more, and then it was time to rest. On tours also, I had a particular way of dealing with the timetable. Usually we'd arrive in the new city somewhere around lunchtime, and everybody would go out to lunch, and then they would turn up for the rehearsal late in the afternoon, and in the evening would be the concert. But my schedule was slightly different. I would arrive at the hotel, check in, and then I would go to the concert hall, and I would unpack my instrument and I'd practice. And by the time the orchestra arrived, I'd already done maybe a couple of hours work by myself. And then I'd play the concert and I was ready to move on. But jet lag, as you will know, is a very debilitating phenomenon. And I often found that when I came home from a long, the time difference to deal with, which is most challenging, is an 8-hour time difference. So there were occasions, for example, when I came back, traveled back from Hong Kong or China back to London, or from the West Coast of the United States. And what I found, I always thought I was fine, but I finally realized one day that what it was that had meant that I'd scraped the side of my car in a car park twice. And the common denominator was that the first time I scraped my car trying to park it in a car park was immediately after coming back from Los Angeles, with an 8-hour time difference. I thought that I was fine, but obviously my judgment was slightly impaired. And the next time I did the same thing and I scraped the car on the other side, I'd flown back from China. So one has to realize that however well you think you're coping with jet lag, there's always the slight problem that your body is not as well adjusted as you think it is. But, the best thing to do is to be in good physical shape, to eat well, and to sleep well. And the rest, you have to just take it as it comes.
Yes, yes. And I have a very, I'm not sure. I think maybe a lot of people have asked you this question, like, because you're a double bassist and you bring your own double bass to travel around the world for any concerts or performance. How do you like protect, or how do you maintain the double bass, your bass? Yeah.
You're right that if you're a violinist, you take your violin into the cabin of the aircraft. It is easy. If you're a flute
Yes.
player, you take your instrument with you into the plane. But as a double bass player, there's a particular challenge. Cellists also have the benefit of, the orchestra will usually buy seats for the cellos inside the plane. And all they have to do is to turn up early to check in early. But the bass players have a problem. You have to have a large flight case for the instrument, and it has to be well packed because, stringed instruments are quite valuable. So you want to be sure that the instrument is going to survive well packed in a flight case in the hold of an aircraft. But I have to say that the Academy St. Martin in the Fields were truly exceptional in the way that they dealt with this challenge. They provided flight cases. They also provided the possibility for one to drive to the airport so that you could take the bass right to the check-in place. They also arranged for you to park, and they took care of all the problems associated with transporting a double bass. As you will know, there were always excess fees to be paid, and they took care of everything. And also, they, whenever necessary, they made sure that there was some additional pairs of hands to make sure that instruments could be loaded. Because, you see, with a fiddle and a suitcase, it is easy. With a double bass, it is slightly more challenging, and it is not always possible to lug a double bass and a suitcase and everything else. And you will probably know, or you will find out that bass players who tour a lot, without any help, they will always develop back problems. So one has to be really careful how you wheel the instrument, how you carry it, or don't try to do too much. But I have to say that the Academy St. Martin in the Fields, because we toured so much, they had a wonderful framework in place, which made it possible for us as bass players to just get on with the job of playing the music without having to worry too much about the instrument. Now, of course, since I've left the Academy, I have to take care of all these arrangements myself. But I do have a very light flight case, which makes things, and it's also shaped like a bass rather than too unwieldy. So on a practical level, I can cope, but I have to say that if you work with an orchestra like the Academy, which travels so much, it is a blessing when there's such a wonderful process in place to deal with the challenge.
Yes. All right. Thank you for sharing this, because I think it's very important as a young, no matter a young bass player or who's a student or anything, if they're traveling from another country to UK or any other countries to further their studies, music journey, they will, I think for bassists, they will have difficulties and maybe some questions about this. So thank you for answering this. It helps a lot.
Yeah. Could I just add something about? Could I just add one other thing about traveling with double bass? Sometimes nowadays I find it easier not to travel the bass, but to arrange to borrow an instrument when I arrive. For example, when I travel to South Africa, where I know a lot of bass players, I know that there are instruments that I can hire and use, and that are uh, capable of performing the function that I need. But there are certain things where I always take my own bass. If I'm playing solo concertos, I will always take my own double bass. But occasionally for chamber music and various other things, if you know that you have access to instruments that are reliable, you can hire or borrow instruments.
Yes, yes, yes. Because I've known that because your own bass, you're used to everything, the positions and everything. And if it's a different bass, it's gonna be, yeah, there will be a difference and everything
You're
is
absolutely right. Reliability is vital when you're a string player, but playing on different instruments teaches you something very important. It teaches you flexibility. It also means that you have to be mentally a little bit more alert. And also you have to listen more closely. You don't just rely upon physical memory. You have to listen carefully to what you're actually doing. The first few times I borrowed an instrument to play concerto, to play chamber music was challenging. And then I developed a way of doing it. Also, I know the kind of instruments I like to borrow. So when I go to the United States, there's a particular bass that I always try to borrow. When I go to South Africa, there's a particular bass, but I have to admit that in South Africa, I've now taken a spare double bass. So there's one that is always there that I will use. But, when I go to Europe, most countries in Europe, there's a maker called Stefan Krattenmacher, who's a fabulous double bass or luthier. He makes basses and cellos. And I always try to use one of his instruments because they sound well, they're great to play, and also he's always willing to help. So I'm very lucky that I have a fabulous network of luthiers around the world who make wonderful instruments, and they're happy for me to be able to share in their joy.
Whoa, that's so good. Or okay. Well, it's very, very it's for maybe for other students or maybe people who are on their journey, it might be a bit hard for them, but it's very good that you introduce like some luthiers that you've known and you have connected, and I hope that it will help people or any bases outside so they can find, and it will be very helpful for them.
Absolutely.
Then yep.
It's important to champion not just new music, but also new instruments. So, and I try to do both.
All right. Okay. So next, our next question is gonna be about how, like, about the recordings you've done with like major labels and artists. Can you tell us more? Anything about?
Yes, I mean, when it comes to recordings, I've done a lot of classical music recordings, but also a lot of commercial things. And I think what your young people would like to know is that every time they watch Harry Potter, I'll be playing the Harry Potter soundtracks also. When they watch Batman or many of the Lord of the Rings or the famous films, I play on them. Also pop music. So that's one, the commercial part is another part of my life that I've played a lot of studio music. But if we just go to the classical side, I mean, it's difficult to arrive at a number of how many CD recordings I have been involved with, but there are many of them. So early in my life, I started off recording a lot of orchestral works for Naxos and various chamber music things. And during my life with the Academy, I did an extraordinary amount of recording. The Academy really is an orchestra that it's known as one of the most recorded orchestras in the world, if not maybe the most recorded orchestra, but it is one of the most recorded orchestras. And they learned how to record well and efficiently and very quickly. There's a process. It's a bit like, when you make a solo recording, the first solo recording you make is the most difficult because you don't understand the process. And also it is very tiring because everything is new. When you make your second solo recording, you know a little bit more. You know exactly what's going to happen and what it is you need to do. By the time you do the third one, you have the process up and running and you really turn up and you just do what's necessary. I've done 15 solo recordings now, and I know that when I walk into the studio in front of the microphones, that I will be leaving relatively early. If we book 3 days, let's say, for solo recording, I know I'll be out in 2.5 days maximum, because I know what needs to be done. I know how long it takes to learn the pieces I need to record. And the Academy was like this. The Academy was one of the most efficient, I wouldn't say one of the most efficient. I would say it was the most efficient recording orchestra. And Sir Neville knew the process so incredibly well. And even if you were recording a piece that nobody had ever played before, it was done extraordinarily quickly. He knew exactly what to do. Now, just to put to give you an example of why I say that Sir Neville was so good at recording. Let's presume that you're recording a Beethoven symphony, something simple, relatively simple, should I say. We would do the first take, and then Sir Neville would go into the control room to listen to it. He'd have his score, he'd make a few notes, and he would come out back into the studio. And he would just say 3 or 4 things to the orchestra, and then we play again, and almost as if by magic, every problem has been fixed. And then we move on, we do the next thing, and the next, and so it was incredibly efficient. And every recording in the Academy that you listen to has the same quality. All the notes in the right order, in time, in tune, but with a little bit of real quality and effervescence. And that's what Sir Neville was able to bring to it. And also the artists we worked with also had this quality, that we recorded with the artists that kind of were part of this Academy vision. The Academy was not, as I said, not just an orchestra, it was a vision of how music should be. And so every member of the Academy in the orchestra embodied that vision and also possessed the musical virtuosity to realize that dream, which was Sir Neville's dream of how music should be. Every soloist we worked with, we didn't just work with them once, we worked with them long term, so they became part of a musical family. Joshua Bell, for example, who is now music director of the Academy, first came to work with the orchestra when he was 19 years old or thereabouts to make a recording of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. And from that date onwards, he came to visit regularly. He became a friend, and then he became music director. So this is the kind of relationship that everybody has to the Academy. For me also, I was in the orchestra for 20 years, but I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that was one of the happiest chapters in my musical life. I still go to hear the orchestra. I follow everything they do because it's like my family.
Wow, it's like, yeah, I can really relate. Like, although I'm not a professional musician, but I've learned how to play the double bass like during high school, and you make me just like the memories. You reminded me of the memories back then, and when I'm going back to high school, like I will still play with them. I will still reconnect with them. Like, thank you very much for sharing. Like,
yes,
it's really good that music really connects people, no matter what instruments you're playing. Like, although you've left or retired, but you still go back and you still play.
Exactly. We mustn't forget that everything we achieve in life is not a personal achievement. It is because of our connection to the world and to those who enable us to do what we do. If we forget that, we've lost a very big part of our humanity.
Yes. And I have another question here that about the article. Like, I went into your biography and your website, and I've seen the article about your retirement from the Academy. Like, when can you tell us more? When did you decide to make such a big decision, and was there any specific reason for doing that?
Well, everything in life is a journey, and as one goes along, you have interesting thoughts and interesting developments take place. And when I left the Camerata, which was my first orchestra where I spent 11 years, I just arrived at this point where I knew I had to leave. Something just told me that in order to progress, I had to open another door. And then I joined the Academy, and also I was a member of the London Mozart Players. And likewise, when I left the Mozart Players, I just knew that chapter was finished. I had to open another door. And then with the Academy, the same thing arose. I realized that I could remain forever, or I could open another door and see what was beyond that door. And 2014 was that year for me when I finally realized that I had to leave, even if I didn't know what it was I was going to be doing after I left the Academy. But I felt that I wanted to be able to develop a musical identity without an organization, without an orchestra, or to see whether it was possible. I also knew that I had some musical ambitions. There were things I wanted to do. I had previously run a chamber ensemble, but because the academy was so busy, I stopped doing that. And I knew that I wanted to return to the idea of running a chamber ensemble. I also knew that I wanted to do more solo playing, because at that stage, I think I'd done about 10 recordings. I also knew that I was, Sir Neville made me realize that I was interested in conducting. Or he suggested that I should pursue that as a new part of my new life. And now, of course, I conduct. And not only do I conduct, I also direct my own concertos from the double bass. So I will conduct the first piece in the program, and then I direct a concerto, and then I put the bass away, come back after the interval and conduct the final piece. And that is something, for me, incredibly rewarding and something new. I don't think any other bass player has ever done that. Bass players have become conductors, and bass players have been, Bottesini was a great conductor. He conducted the premiere of Aida. Kusevitsky gave up the bass to become conductor, and he was a famous conductor of the Boston Orchestra. But I play still and I conduct in the same concert. So this is, for me, it's new, and I find it invigorating. Also, my chamber ensemble gives me great energy. And then, of course, I have a publishing company also, because a lot of the music that I discover, or the music written for me, is not necessarily going to be published by anybody else. And I'd like it to be available for the whole world to be able to see. So I publish it myself, because if you want to get something done, do it yourself, is my motto.
Yes.
And during lockdown, actually, I've had an incredible project, which was to commission chamber music versions of pieces that we all know well and to publish them. So, for example, Beethoven's Violin Concerto. Have you ever heard it played with just a string quintet? It's possible. So somebody that I've known for a long time produced this edition of Beethoven's Violin Concerto with solo violin and string quintet. And it's available from my publishing company. And, we performed it just the other day, and that gives me great pleasure. So I make music with good friends, people that I choose to work with because I enjoy their company and I share philosophy with them and also musical ideas. So this, this new chapter is an exciting one. Also, I work with a lot of young people, as you know. I work with South African National Youth Orchestra, with various other orchestras. I've coached also in Poland, the iCulture Orchestra, because music needs to have a future. And the youth are the future. So I have an obligation to work with young people.
Wow, that's very, very interesting, because now you've worked with either seniors or maybe new young musicians, like, and yes, and I remember, how do you feel like teaching, and what were you thinking of, like, what was your motto or anything about teaching, now teaching, because I think I've seen that you're teaching in a college.
Yes, I'm professor at the Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music. And I teach not just the double bass, but I also coach chamber music. Now, teaching is probably one of the biggest responsibilities in life. When I was a young person, I made a lot of mistakes, and I followed a route by myself almost, navigating. And when I learned pieces, I learned them often by myself, and I had to make all the mistakes first before I arrived at the solutions. Also, I realized that the way that you play music is directly related to your own personal philosophy. The two things are not separate. So when I teach young people, I first of all would like them to learn the mechanics of playing the instrument well, but I'd like them to have philosophy also about music and about life. There are many young people who write to me years after I taught them. And it is very gratifying sometimes to receive an email from, let's say, Armenia, where somebody writes to you and they say, I've had this incredible success. I'm now a member of this great orchestra. And I date the change in my fortunes to that masterclass where you told me A, B, C, and D. And for me, that is very satisfying, because I know that my job is done with that person at least. So I realize that every word I say to my students is powerful. It will either set them off on the correct path, or it could undermine what they do for the rest of their lives. When I provide a solution, I'm not a dictator, but I provide a solution in order that they have a shortcut to mastery and to enjoyment. That is what great teaching is about. We have developed in music methodologies for being able to learn things more efficiently and more quickly and at a much higher level. In the same way that, when as human beings, we don't have to reinvent the wheel when we are born or to reinvent language and things. We stand on the shoulders of all those who went before us. And likewise, as professor, it is my responsibility to provide this level of enlightenment for the next generation and also to point them in the right direction. Also, when I work with orchestras, I mean, I conduct the South African National Youth Orchestra, I conduct various other young people, and I have to impart to them all the wisdom I was privileged to acquire during the course of my musical career. How to play Mozart, how to play Beethoven, why should Mozart sound different from Haydn? What are the differences? Shostakovich, how to play, why is Shostakovich different from Prokofiev? So this is my responsibility, and I enjoy it. It has a bearing on the future.
All right, thank you very much. And now we have some questions from the Q&A sections from our audience. And here we have, someone have asked, hi, thank you for your lovely, what makes you chose such a big instrument to master?
Yeah, that's very, very good question. The truth is that I didn't choose the instrument chose me. I was a cellist before. I went to university as a cellist, and then somehow I was invited to go to meet somebody in a coffee shop who then told me that I was going to play the bass. And I didn't argue, I just did it. And I discovered many years later that the reason they told me to play the bass is because at university they needed somebody to play the bass in the string orchestra. They didn't have anybody. And I had to learn the bass well enough in 5 months from scratch to be able to play Dvorak String Serenade. And I did. And I have to say that being required to learn the bass was one of the most important things that happened in my life. So I didn't choose the bass, it chose me, and it has been responsible for the most remarkable journey in life. And I'm thankful to the people who made me play the bass.
Yes, and the next one, the same person asked another question about, isn't it very troublesome to move such a big instruments around? And can you give some advice to those who would like to learn the double bass?
Yes, look, the double bass is physically larger than most instruments. The only other people I feel really sorry for are harp players. But with the double bass, you soon develop a method of how to move it efficiently. And you have to also find something to protect it well. So the first thing, if you're a bass player, get a cover which will protect the instrument well. Get a strap which works really well, so you can carry it on your left shoulder. But even better than that, find a wheel, get a wheel, so that you don't have to always bear the weight of the entire instrument. To carry the weight of the instrument just for a few yards is fine, but when you have to carry it big distances, it's going to be a problem in the future. So my recommendation to young people is don't wait till the problem of hurting your back has arrived. Buy a wheel, buy a good cover, and always make sure that you don't bear the full weight of the bass on your shoulders. Also, when you're practicing, you have to use the instrument in such a way that the two of you become friends, that you use the weight of the instrument to help you play it. Anyway, that's a much more complicated question. Maybe we can deal with that for the bass players in a separate discussion sometime.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. And our next question from a different person is, hello, Professor Bosch. It is really an eye-opener for me to listen to your playing. I truly enjoyed the interview. Could you give advice for someone who would like to pursue in music majoring on the double bass, and what are the options as far as job is concerned as a double bassist?
Okay. As a musician, I didn't set out to have a job or to have a career. I set out with a complete and utter love of music. The career was incidental. Because I loved the instrument and because I mastered the instrument to the extent that I did, what I did was necessary for various organizations, orchestras, ensembles, and also in the cause of music. So my advice to young musicians is, don't necessarily just look for a job or look at an orchestra. What you do as an artist has to be good enough to be able to do anything that's available. Don't just play in an orchestra, don't just play in a string quartet, don't just play do everything. Life is full of opportunities, and the most important thing is that you have to be willing to tackle any challenge that comes your way. If somebody asks you to play Schoenberg this afternoon. Even if you haven't looked at the music, say, yes, I'm available. Do it, because you will learn something. Whatever arises, it arises for a good reason. It's because it needs to arise and it will be good for you. I never said no to anything. If I was free, I would do it. So I would advise you, do whatever you can to find every possible opportunity in life. I mean, in my home at the moment, you can see that the shelves behind me are empty. And the reason they're empty is because we have a big building project going on at our home at the moment, and I have to empty the shelves of things because they have to be moved. But I found a lot of documents from my early musical life. And those documents, they're letters, typewritten letters. I mean, I don't know that most of the young people I'm talking to now will not know what a typewriter is, because they they haven't existed for a while. Now we use computers. But I had a manual typewriter on which I wrote letters to festivals, to orchestras, to proposing ideas of things I wanted to do. I wrote to musicians, I commissioned music, and I found all these letters dating back to the early 1980s when I first joined the profession. So every day of your life, you have to do one little thing which takes you closer to your ambition and your goal to be a musician. Also to study. Of course, I would say Trinity Laban Conservatoire is the best place in the world to come and study. But you have to find the right institution for yourself. You have to find the right person. Who is the person that's going to allow you to flourish as the human being that you could be? You don't want to be a clone of anybody else, but you have to find the environment and also the people who will set you free to be who you can be, to fulfill, not just to fulfill your potential, but to create new potential. Because the truth of the matter is, we are not born with finite capabilities or skills. Whatever you do, you create new possibilities. Find somebody who will do that for you as a human being, and you will enjoy every minute of your life.
All right, thank you very much. And the next question we have is about, is St. Martin in the Field a string orchestra or a full orchestra, like with
As I said,
brass?
it is many things. It's a full orchestra, but it uses 4 basses only when it's at its biggest. The symphony orchestra uses 8 basses, but the Academy will play all that repertoire with 4 basses. So if you listen to our Brahms recordings, for example, the symphonies, 4 basses only, but it sounds like 20, because it's 4 great musicians playing music well. When we play Beethoven 7 with Joshua Bell, 2 basses, it sounds like 8. So the Academy is that, it's a big orchestra with 4 basses maximum, some often. And then it's also a chamber orchestra with 2 basses and 8 first violins, but it's also a string ensemble. So it'll be 1 bass, 3 cellos, 2 violas, and then it'll be an ensemble. It'll be an octet, 4 violins, 2 violas, 2 cellos, or it'll be a Beethoven septet, or So the Academy is incredibly versatile. It came into life as a string ensemble directed without conductor. And it was the first orchestra in the world to be able to play an enormous repertoire without conductor. So Neville, as you know, was a violinist. And he started this ensemble because he had this dream about how music could be played better. And then as the thing grew, he picked up a baton and began to become a conductor. But he left Cancelito and Iona to do the directing bits. So the Academy, in essence, is a versatile thing which can go from a small ensemble to symphony orchestra size.
All right, thank you. And the same person asks, do you all work full time, like having rehearsal or practice every day, or is it more like a freelancing basis?
Nobody has a contract. So it's not like the BBC Symphony Orchestra where everybody is employed by the BBC and they go to work every day in a particular way. The musicians of the Academy are freelance. And the reason they are freelance is because they do other things. Most people in the orchestra will also be playing in a string quartet, or they'll be leading another orchestra, or they have a solo career. So they're complex musicians who have many great responsibilities. And all the work that the Academy does is project-based. So you'll be a member of the Academy, and sometimes you might not be free to do a particular tour, but they have other members who would be free. So, but they all come from the same pool, the same quality of players. Project-based work. So let's say the orchestra does 30 tours for the year. That's enough to keep you busy full-time. if you wished. But on the other hand, you might want to do just 15 of the tours and go and play your string quartet for some of the time. So you have this level of flexibility. In my earlier years with the Academy, I did all of it, or as much as I could. And then for the next phase, I did mostly Academy, but I also did commercial work and also did a little bit as principal double bass with the Mozart players. But I had many things going on. So you can have a satisfying and complex life as a member of the Academy. But to get into the Academy requires a superlative effort, because it's the ambition of every string player and wind player for that matter to want to play with an orchestra that's a global brand. It's the only orchestra that I really know of that has achieved this kind of status. And I have to say that I'm very proud to have been a part of it for that time.
Wow, very, very interesting. Yes, I've never heard of something like this, because more of them are like contracted and you have to sign, and yep. So very interesting. And there's two more questions here. So someone said that, hi, does the temperature and humidity affect the double bass when you tour around the world?
It does. Instruments are very sensitive. They're like human beings. Of course, they are affected by humidity, by temperature. And of course, you might turn up, for example, in Hong Kong, it can be very humid. And instruments behave very differently in humidity. So let's imagine it's just been in a cold aircraft in the hold. Then it arrives in a very humid Hong Kong. And then it goes into a air-conditioned concert hall, very cold again. So the changes of temperature play havoc with the instrument. And it might not sound as well as you'd hope. So sometimes you pick up the instrument and it's almost like it's not working. But you have to very quickly try to find a way to bring it back to life. So you have lots of challenges. Instruments are like human beings. They're temperamental, very sensitive, and they require to be nurtured. So you're right, yes, it can be a problem.
Yes. And there's one more question here. May I know, what are the differences in between the 4-string bass with the extension compared to the 5-string bass?
Oh, I mean, it's fundamentally simple. With a 4-string bass and the extension, from the bottom E, you have this little additional piece which takes you down to bottom C. With a 5-string bass, instead of having to have a little bit extra for the 4th string, you just have the additional string. But I play 4 strings and I have an extension. 5 strings, a lot more complicated, and also the instrument behaves in different ways. So for me, 5 strings, too many strings. I'm happy to stick to 4. But if you have the opportunity to become skilled as a 4-string player and as a 5-string player, it's probably worth it. In Germany, of course, as you know, to be able to play 5 strings and the tuba is an asset. But that's the fundamental difference.
All right, thank you very much. And as you may have heard, the Jesselton Philharmonic Orchestra has involved itself in a variety of activities. On behalf of the JPO, we would like to ask your views on the JPO and its activities. Additionally, how would you suggest the JPO and its members for any further improvement itself?
I'm absolutely delighted to see what the Jesselton Orchestra does. Playing concerts, very important, because that's how we all learn. You only learn truly in public. And the more you perform, the more you internalize about the process, about the music. I'm also excited to know that you play concerts with full orchestra and also with string orchestra, and also that you play chamber music. You will know from the discussion I had earlier talking about the Academy, how the Academy plays different things, symphony orchestra, chamber orchestra, string ensemble, chamber music. So I'm delighted to know that you're on this route where everybody gets to do a little bit of everything. The other thing which is important for the bass section, I would say, play bass quartets if you have 4 basses, play bass octets if you've got, because it will bind you together as a section. And when you have a great foundation, you'll have a great orchestra. Every great orchestra in the world has a great bass section. The outreach work, is important, because without going into the community, you will never have an audience. And what's the point of playing to an empty hall? The outreach work that you do, I think, is exciting. The music has to connect to the community of which you are part. The other thing, making sure that young musicians do examinations with various examination boards, again, is important. And why is it important? It's because it gives you an indication of your level of achievement. It's not the only thing that is necessary, but it gives you a really clear idea of how you're progressing. If you get a distinction at such and such a level, you know that you're capable of doing what is required. Also, being a part of this interview series for me is a pleasure because it is important to be connected to the whole world. When I grew up, I grew up in South Africa, which, as you know, is the southern tip of Africa. But I always had this dream about traveling the world. I never gave. At the age of 19, I made my plan and I came to England because I wanted to connect with the whole musical world, the whole world politically, and to see all those places I'd read about. And now technology is a wonderful thing because it allows you the possibility to connect by phone or just the click of a mouse with the whole world and to discover all the things necessary about the world. When I was a young person, if you wanted to hear a particular recording, you had to buy the record. And if that record wasn't sold in your country, the only way you could buy it is by going to the country where it was being sold or to write to them, and 2 weeks later the thing would arrive. Music. You could only buy the music that was in the shop or that you could order. Now you just sit at your computer, you go into IMSLP or you go to the music shop online and you buy anything. So I'm delighted to see how you're so connected internationally. Your collaboration with musicians is important. So, I don't know what's on the program for your next concert, for example, but let's say you were playing Mozart or Haydn or Beethoven or Schubert. I would come to conduct your orchestra and I would make you understand why the Academy's Schubert taught me something and what it was we did with Mozart in the Academy. So you have to find the people who will give you what you need. As I said earlier, the greatest way to learn is to know what you need to learn and then to know where you can find what you need to learn. So I'm really excited about what the Jesselton Orchestra does. I was only introduced to the orchestra and its project a few weeks ago when a good friend of mine told me about you. So what can I really say about the Jesselton Orchestra? Congratulations, you do wonderful work, and I wish you great success. If I could come to visit you tomorrow, I would.
All right. Thank you very much. We're really happy. To hear your response, and it's very touching. Like if you would really you can give your advice and everything, because I know that there's not a lot of double bassist in where JPO is in, which is the east of Malaysia. So it's really hard, and we're very happy to have you to give us and you to give us suggestion and responses. So now I'm very sorry that everyone for the audience, but we're coming to the end of tonight's broadcast. We would like to remind everyone that our JPO family program will be broadcasted twice a week until further notice. Join us next time with our next guest as we will post our poster and the information near the time. More details can be found on our Facebook page. A video recording of tonight's broadcast will also be available on the YouTube channel along with past webinars and the soon to be broadcasted interviews. So feel free to share the Zoom webinar registration link, JPO YouTube channel, and the JPO Facebook page with friends and family. For our YouTube audience, if you are enjoying our program, please show your support by pressing the like and subscribe button down below. You guys have been an amazing audience. We from the JPO family wishes that everyone stays safe and healthy as face this crisis together. I will lead the prayer to end tonight's program. Please pray in whatever faith you believe in regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the wonderful time we had during this interview. I pray that you bless Professor Leon abundantly in all his works, present and in the future. We pray that everyone staying strong during this pandemic and give us strength to overcome in this difficult time. We know that most of us are facing the second lockdown due to the high amount of cases increasingly lately. We pray for the frontliners and those who must travel into work. Ask God you provide protection and healthy bodies, no matter who's staying at home or going in and out from work. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you,
Great.
Liam Bosch, for sharing with us. And thank you for the audience for coming tonight. And good night. See you all next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.